As I bent down to pick up each $100 bill scattered across the cold tile floor, I had only one thought. My life just died. Not because of the money. And not because of the scene of my dad throwing money at my feet like I was some beggar on the street. It was because of the smile. The smile on the lips of my 16-year-old sister watching me get humiliated. As if this was precisely what she'd been waiting for her entire life. As Sophia clutched those $300 like a trophy, I finally understood. I hadn't just lost a MacBook. I had lost my entire family. Stay with me as I tell you the story. I'm going to tell you what really happened. Hello, everyone. I'm Ethan Carter, almost 20 years old. I was a sophomore computer science student at the University of Illinois, Chicago, before everything happened. I lived in a small house in the Chicago suburbs with my dad, David Carter, my stepmother, Karen, and my half-sister, Sophia, who was 3 years younger than me. My biological mother died when I was too young to remember much. My memories of her only exist in photographs and stories, but fortunately, my stepmother is a kind woman. We became so close that I consider her my birth mother, and my dad has always felt at peace. From the outside looking in, there wasn't really any conflict between my half-sister Sophia and me. Sure, we had the usual minor disagreements that come with growing up, but I never thought there was this bottomless pit of hatred between us. I believed any problems could be solved under one roof with family love. Besides the people in that house, another woman left a deep mark on my childhood memories, my grandmother, Margaret. She was the person I turned to when I needed to pour out my heart, the bridge between my stepmother and me, the replacement for the biological mother I had lost. She wasn't wealthy or well off, but she gave me her entire old age with patience, love, and stories about my mother that made me feel protected. When I graduated from high school, my grandmother gave me a MacBook Pro. It was her final gift before she left this world. I always saw it as a learning tool and my most sacred keepsake. I still remember how her hands trembled when she placed that box in mine. She told me to use it to write my future. Even though she wouldn't be there, she would still walk alongside me. When I gently ran my fingers over the silver back of that machine, I told myself, this Mac isn't just a laptop. It's also the image of my grandmother, my childhood, and all my memories. But all those sacred things ultimately vanished because of the very sister I had trusted most. That night, after my shift at the convenience store, I came home exhausted. But the moment I stepped into my room, my heart seemed to stop. The final treasure my grandmother had left me, the MacBook, was gone. At first, I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe I had left it somewhere, but my memory was still intact. That afternoon, before leaving university, I had placed it neatly on my desk in the exact familiar spot where I sat for hours every day. A wave of panic hit me. I tore through every drawer, every corner of the room, but it was all useless. The laptop wasn't there anymore. Hundreds of questions flooded my mind, but none had answers. I rushed out to the living room and found my dad sitting there, motionless in front of the TV screen, his face ice cold. I asked him shakily if he had seen my MacBook anywhere. And with just one short sentence, he crushed my heart. I already sold it. In that moment, my whole body went limp. I stammered, asking why he had touched something so important without permission. But Dad didn't care at all. He turned off the TV, stood up, and then walked past me with cold eyes. Before closing his bedroom door, he left behind one sentence, heavy as a verdict. You have to pay the price for your actions. His words immediately reminded me of that morning. Around 7 o'clock, my sister Sophia had run to complain to Dad that I had stolen $300 she had saved up for hanging out. At that time, I was still in my room wrestling with homework after pulling an all-nighter. Right before I left the house, Dad stopped me and questioned me. He said Sophia was sure that I was the one who took the money and had even laughed at her. I swore to Dad that I hadn't touched it, but the look in his eyes had already completely lost trust. He just scolded me, then forced me to pay my sister back. Sophia had left the house that morning, so I couldn't confront her, and Dad was calmly cold about it. He just told me to pay the money back before dinner. But that day, I was busy with presentations at school, then went to work, so all those ridiculous accusations got pushed aside. I had even thought that when I got home that night, I would sit down and have a clear conversation with Sophia. But it was all too late. Instead of a dialogue, I was only faced with an empty room and the pain of losing my grandmother's final keepsake. After a few seconds of standing there, remembering everything that had happened, I honestly couldn't believe my dad had acted this way. The pent-up anger made me rush quickly toward Sophia's room. As soon as I walked in, I saw her sitting there doing a face mask, looking completely casual, as if nothing had happened. That image made the blood in my body feel like it was boiling. The moment Sophia saw me, she looked briefly confused. Keeping my voice trembling but still trying to control myself, I asked her, "Why did you falsely accuse me?" Why didn't you answer your phone all day when I called and didn't reply to my texts either? But she didn't respond. She pretended she couldn't hear anything. The anger in me immediately exploded. I stepped forward and kicked hard at a shoebox under her bed and shouted, "Do you believe I won't leave you alone anymore?" Seeing me like that, Sophia immediately screamed, "Dad!" In just a moment, my dad and stepmother rushed into the room. The atmosphere in the room became thick. I looked straight at Sophia and said through gritted teeth, "Tell the truth." But she just turned to Dad, her voice shaky but full of calculation, and falsely accused me. He was going to hit me. In that instant, my dad's face turned red with anger. He pointed at me and yelled, "You already stole, and you're still acting like this?" Next to him, my stepmother looked at me with eyes full of disappointment. She didn't say a word, but I understood that was the look of someone who had lost faith. As for me, I tried to stay calm, turned to Dad, and said, "I told you I didn't take her money. She has no proof. Don't falsely accuse me." Right then, my dad laughed bitterly and shot back, "False accusation? When you were little, you used to steal money to go to the arcade and sit there for hours. Now you dare to argue?" His words left me speechless. That was exactly right. When I was 11 years old, I had secretly taken a few dollars from his desk because I was so obsessed with technology and online games. Back then, I just wanted to experience playing games at those computer cafes on the street. But that childhood mistake, even to this day, still became the excuse for him to label me as a thief forever. After a heavy silence, my dad coldly said, "In the black market, money moves fast. Machines move fast. Why would you regret something that doesn't belong to you anymore?" After finishing those words, he pulled $300 from his pocket and gave them to Sophia. Then he threw the remaining $900 at my feet. With a harsh voice, he said, like it was final, "Your sister owes, so she pays. That's fair." As those $100 bills scattered coldly across the tile floor, my dad and stepmother silently turned their backs and left. Right before closing the door, the image of Sophia clutching those $300 in her hand like a trophy was still burned into my eyes, bitter and shameless. And me, after years of giving in to her, from those times when we were little, fighting over toys or even pulling each other's hair to get a hug from Dad, now all those memories suddenly became a bitter joke. I stood frozen in a room overflowing with things Dad had always provided for her: makeup, nail polish, perfume, even tiny hair ties. She had everything. And me, now, I was left with only an emptiness in my heart. I was only 19 years old. I had just graduated from high school with honors, just stepped through the door of university barely over a year ago, carrying many passions and aspirations. Yet, at that very moment, my heart felt like it exploded into pieces. I bent down, trembling as I picked up those bills scattered on the floor, bitterly realizing my dad had sold cheaply the final keepsake my grandmother had left behind. He had traded all the memories and love for a few cold green bills, as if to remind me that in this house, trust and family affection could be weighed and measured by the value of an object. As I bent over collecting all that money, like I was trying to gather up pieces of my torn dignity, beside me, Sophia, who was only 16 then, smiled as she stared intently at the phone in her hand. I wasn't sure what she was doing, but the moment she caught my gaze, that smile quickly faded, replaced by a flash of confusion. I probably would have taught her a lesson without trying to control myself. But I knew that if I let my anger explode, I would be the only one who had to pay the price, and that trouble would be even bigger than everything I had ever endured. Walking out of Sophia's room, each of my steps was heavy as stone. In my head, there was only one word: hatred. I hated this house. I hated my father, who, because of one childhood mistake when I was 11, would blame everything on me whenever Sophia lost something. When I returned to the safest place I had in that cold house full of accusations, I sat in silence for hours, unable to cry anymore. I used to think that after a day of exhausting study and work, I would at least find warmth when I came home. But no, it was all an illusion. A house would never again be a place to return to. That night was supposed to be the night I submitted my final project deadline. I only had one last piece of code to fix before sending it off by the midnight deadline. The entire project, a simple data simulation application that my team and I had spent weeks building, was entirely saved on the MacBook. But now it had vanished along with the keepsake Dad had sold in his anger. I had kept all the files offline but hadn't synced to Drive or Git because I had just changed repositories and my storage quota was temporarily maxed out. Everything I had worked on for the past month, thousands of lines of code, documentation files, and test data, vanished instantly. The next day, my email inbox received a cold warning from Professor Thompson, who taught advanced programming and had placed high expectations on me. He wrote briefly, "Ethan, if you don't submit your project this week, I'll have to give you an F." I knew that a week might sound like a lot from the outside. However, each line of code represented months of accumulation for a final project. Losing it meant losing everything, and my professor was known for being strict. He never accepted late submissions. Once a deadline passed, it was considered a failure. In the group chat, my friends angrily sent messages, "Ethan, what happened? Don't let the whole team die together." Reading those messages from my friends, I could only clench my phone tighter. I understood clearly that my mistake hadn't just pushed me into a dead end but had also dragged the entire team down into the same abyss. Sitting in the middle of my dark room, I dropped my shoulders and said to myself, "They don't understand. I've already lost everything." The days that followed passed heavily in a terrifying silence. I still went to class, feeling guilty toward the group members, and I returned to the house that used to be warm every evening. But every action was no longer me, the cheerful kid I used to be each day. I sat in my room for hours, staring at the empty desk where the MacBook used to sit, with no motivation left to start over. No one mentioned what had been done to me in Dad's house. Dad still read the newspaper as usual. My stepmother cleaned and cooked, and Sophia still comfortably laughed and talked on the phone. Family dinners still had the sound of clinking silverware and laughter echoing from the living room. But it all seemed to belong to another world. I sat there, silent like a shadow they had pushed out of their familiar circle. Before, whenever something happened, I would turn to my grandmother. She was the only place I could sit down and pour out everything I held in my heart. But now, she was gone. And those nights, I fell into a state of suffocating emptiness. Every night, I lay in darkness, listening to laughter and conversation from outside my room, feeling like a guilty person who wasn't allowed to speak. I lived quietly like that for many days until one thought became more transparent and precise: I no longer had a place in this house. But everything still hadn't stopped there. Sophia's next action made me understand that I couldn't stand living under the same roof with her for one more minute. Sophia had turned my pain into entertainment on her personal page with over 100,000 followers, where she usually just showed off new items, a few lipsticks, a small bag, or selfies that always got thousands of likes. She recreated the scene of Dad throwing money on the floor, then edited it with CapCut, added shaky effects, and overlaid cheap remix music. That video appeared like a public sentence with the caption, $300 disappeared, and the ending for someone pretending to be innocent. When I saw that video, it felt like someone was twisting a knife into my heart. The whole world I was trying to hold on to suddenly shattered into pieces. The video spread faster than I thought. College friends shared it with laughing emojis, then added some sarcastic comments, "Thought he was so decent. Who would have guessed he'd act like that?" Some people messaged me with just one line, "Did you really take your sister's money? Can't believe it." Those seemingly simple words hit me like a hammer straight to the head. I sat there speechless, staring at the screen, my heart crushed. In that moment, I realized my family hadn't just abandoned me, but even my reputation, the name I had tried to protect for so many years, was now being publicly trampled. It was like someone had directly stuck a "thief" label on my forehead in a crowded place, and everyone believed that lie except me. The next day at school, my steps were heavy in the hallway. I could hear whispers behind my back, some stifled giggles that echoed. Occasionally, a glance would sweep over me, no longer the normal looks from friends, but of suspicion, contempt, and pity. Even during a discussion, Professor Harris made veiled comments about honesty in academics. He didn't name anyone specifically, but everyone understood who those words were aimed at. And me, after everything that had just happened, I just wanted to disappear from this world. After more than a week drowning in humiliation and disdain, I felt like I was suffocating. Before, whenever I was wrongfully accused, I would shout at Dad that I didn't do it, or run to tell Grandma, or cry myself to sleep and pretend nothing happened the next morning. But this time, my endurance had hit rock bottom. The day I received the results for advanced programming, I was stunned to see I had failed straight up. The scholarship I had maintained for the past 2 years also went with those lines of code in the MacBook that Dad had sold. Only one thought echoed: leaving this house was the only answer. I wrote a letter that evening and quietly left it under my pillow. I didn't want to text or call. In my heart, that was the only way to say my final words without facing them again. But before I could leave, the truth found its way out. Around 9 o'clock that evening, as I was packing a few things to go to Jacob's house, the only friend who had stayed by my side to comfort me, a scream tore through the night. Just hearing that desperate sound, I immediately recognized it as my stepmother, Karen's, voice. Just a moment later, I rushed to the hallway and saw a scene that made my heart clench. She was grabbing Sophia's hair, dragging her straight into the living room. Karen's face was red, her eyes bright with fury. A few seconds later, my dad appeared, like every time, responding to Sophia's urgent call. But this time, his eyes were no longer certain but mixed with an incomprehensible confusion. In the middle of the brightly lit living room, Karen breathed heavily, her voice choked with indignation. She looked straight at my dad, then said through gritted teeth, I heard her own mouth talking to her friend about falsely accusing Ethan outside her room door. With my ears, I heard her bragging about taking that money to travel. She fooled you. The moment she heard those words, the room fell into heavy silence. I was speechless. Dad stood frozen, and Sophia started crying, trying to argue, Mom is falsely accusing me. Instead of arguing, Karen pulled out her phone and played a recording. The sound came out clearly, word by word, Sophia's voice, bragging as if it were an achievement. She told how she deliberately staged losing money, listed what she would buy for the trip, and even giggled while boasting that she was delighted when she filmed Dad humiliating me for views. When the recording ended, the room fell into terrifying silence. Sophia stood frozen like a statue with no way left to deny. My dad looked at her, his eyes both shocked and pained. Perhaps in his entire life, he had never thought the daughter he spoiled completely could be so cruel. A few seconds later, he looked at her with a trembling voice and roared, Sophia, you lied, didn't you? That accusation was like a blade cutting straight down. Sophia sobbed, then confessed everything. She only thought Dad would make me compensate like every time. She never expected him actually to sell the MacBook. She admitted that she had liked that machine for a long time, had borrowed it to take photos to show off to friends, and when she saw me humiliated, she felt satisfied. Hearing those confessions, I laughed bitterly. There was no more anger in my heart, only a cold emptiness. The little sister I had given in to for so many years had ultimately been the one to push me to a dead end. Beside me, my stepmother was shaking with rage. Perhaps she had also once believed Sophia's words and once thought I was guilty. But when the girl confessed with her own mouth, along with clear evidence, she looked at her like a stranger. As for Dad, the person who had never asked me, did you do it, now just stood there looking at me with eyes heavy with regret. I had already turned my back when he was about to step closer to say something. I walked into my room, slammed the door shut, blocking all ways back for me. At this point, maybe that was more than enough. In the small room where I had grown up with childhood memories, with encouraging hugs from Dad and sweet words from my stepmother, Karen, I no longer found anything meaningful. When the living room gradually returned to quiet, when I didn't know how they were handling things out there, Dad came to my room door. Behind the wooden door, I heard urgent knocking and Dad's voice, choked in every apology. He continuously called my name, begging me to open the door to talk. Right after that, my stepmother's voice also rang out, tearful, continuously repeating the words, I'm sorry. But in my heart, all feelings had already grown cold. After a few minutes of sitting motionless, listening to their pleading outside, I finally screamed with a broken voice, leave me alone. That scream echoed throughout the house to the point where I could even feel the walls and floor vibrating. And perhaps that was the first time I had shouted that loud in almost 20 years. Outside the door also fell silent. No more urgent knocking or belated apologies. I could only faintly hear Sophia crying and explaining, and my stepmother scolding her. And in my heart, everything was just a numb emptiness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I clearly heard every heavy footstep of Dad in the hallway, heard even his whispered self-blame. He called himself an idiot. He promised to try to find the MacBook he had sold on the black market. He said he would do everything to make amends. But to me, those words no longer had any meaning. The next morning, I got up for school and went to my part-time job. In that house, laughter had disappeared. Sophia withdrew into her room. My stepmother was silent, and I was quiet about my life. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the house for my part-time job at the store, Dad suddenly stood blocking the door. With an urgent voice, he said, Ethan, Dad was wrong. Dad will find a way to make it up to you. I slightly bowed my head, sighed once, then replied before stepping past him, Dad didn't just sell a machine. Dad sold away the last memory I had with Grandma. I can't forgive that. In that moment, I knew in my heart that the road ahead would no longer be connected to this house. That night, I officially left the house in suburban Chicago. I went silently, quietly, taking a few belongings to stay at Jacob's house. Perhaps they never thought I would abandon the place where I grew up with such a wordless departure. At exactly 11 p.m., my phone buzzed frantically as I lay curled up on the small bed at Jacob's house. It was Dad calling, but I didn't answer. I only left him a brief, cold text message, David, please don't call me anymore. Don't contact me unless it's truly urgent. When I sent those words, I turned off my phone's ringer, then closed my eyes. That night, for the first time, after many days of living in suffocation and humiliation, I could truly relax and have a long sleep. The next morning, when I turned on my phone, besides a series of missed calls from Dad, I also received voice messages from my stepmother. In those brief recordings, her voice was tearful. She said she had grounded Sophia entirely, said that Dad was trying to fix his mistake, said that if I still thought of her, I should return. But I just sat silently listening to everything. Then asked myself, if she had spoken up to defend me that day, maybe things wouldn't have gone this far. After those messages from them, I didn't care anymore. I began preparing for my new life, a life that was no longer dependent or bound. A life that belonged to me. After everything that had happened, I thought that when I was cold and silent like that, Dad would leave me alone, would accept his own mistake. But he didn't do that. Around late afternoon, when I had just finished class at the university and was waiting for the bus to return to Jacob's house, he suddenly appeared. He walked straight over and blocked me without giving me time to avoid him. After a few seconds of silence, he handed me a crumpled piece of paper, the letter I had left under my pillow. My letter was a confession about everything I had endured over many years. In it, I admitted that I had always been treated like a second-class citizen in my own house for many years. Whenever there was conflict, Dad always chose to believe Sophia first and always rushed to defend her, while I was always seen as the one in the wrong. I also recalled memories that had never faded from my mind. There was a time when Sophia lost a school project, and Dad punished me without ever checking the facts. Later, we found out she had left it outside, and it got ruined by the rain. Or another time, she accused me of stealing her earbuds. Dad scolded me and banned me from going anywhere for a whole week. A week later, the earbuds were found in her drawer, but Dad never said a word of apology. I had written that Dad had never checked the truth, but just assumed I was wrong, only because Sophia cried louder and spoke louder while I chose to endure silently. When I was little, I used to think that was just favoritism. But now, I understood it was worse than that. It was indifference. In Dad's eyes, Sophia was always the one who needed protection, and I was just the one who needed to be punished. I also emphasized that the MacBook incident was the last straw. Dad didn't just sell a computer. Dad sold away the final gift Grandma left before she died. Dad sold away years of dreams, effort, pride, and my memories. And I stated, that was the first time I realized I had nothing left in this house. And that would also be the last time. After a few seconds of standing silent, my eyes glued to the final lines in the letter I had left for David, my whole body felt frozen. That feeling was no longer anger or pain, but just a paralyzing emptiness. I had nothing left to say to him either. Right as the bus stopped in front of us, I slightly turned my head, looked straight at him, and said decisively, "I've contacted Aunt Susan. I'm leaving this place and will never come back." After saying that, I got on the bus, leaving his lost gaze in the fading evening light. Sitting on the bus, taking me back to Jacob's house in Berwyn, only about a minute's drive from Dad's house in suburban Chicago, I sat quietly, watching the streams of people passing by under the afternoon light still lingering on the street. I remembered the phone call with Aunt Susan, my biological mother's cousin, a week earlier when I was still stuck in that suffocating house. She had exclaimed over the phone, "I'm going to teach David a lesson." But I just sighed, then replied, "Aunt Susan, I just hope you'll take me far away. Don't make a scene anymore. I'm so tired after all these years living like a shadow in the face of Dad's favoritism toward Sophia." Thinking about that, I suddenly felt my heart empty and like fate. When I had just arrived at Jacob's yard, my phone announced a new email from the school office. It was confirmation for my application to take a leave and transfer schools that I had submitted the week before. They notified me that my file had been approved and that it would take 6 to 8 weeks to complete the procedures. That meant next semester I could start over at a different school. Sitting down on the old sofa in the living room, I read and reread that email. A feeling of both relief and bitterness crept into my heart. And I realized, no matter who we are, male or female, young or old, if we have to live with injustice for too long, it will erode our souls, leaving wounds that never fully heal. While waiting for the transfer procedures to be completed, I thought I just needed to struggle through finishing the semester, then start a new future with Aunt Susan's help. But no, everything hadn't stopped there. A few days after Dad appeared in front of the school, my stepmother, Karen, brought Sophia to my part-time job. That night, the clock showed nearly 10 o'clock. Outside, Chicago's late winter was bitterly cold, wind whipping through each row of streets, carrying heavy moisture from the alleys. I finished my late shift at the convenience store, stepped out exhausted, and encountered Karen and Sophia waiting right in front of the door under the neon light casting down on the sidewalk. The moment she saw me, Karen gripped Sophia's hand tightly, pulling her forward. She said tremblingly, "Ethan, please listen to her explanation." Sophia looked much more haggard after many days living in torment. As soon as she saw me, she burst into tears, her shoulders shaking violently. With a voice broken by tears, she pleaded, "Please come back home, Ethan." I stood speechless before her words, but then all the memories flooded back at once, the days of being falsely accused, Dad's contemptuous looks, the scene of the MacBook being sold, everything made me want to go crazy. I turned around, intending to walk straight away, but Karen suddenly grabbed my hand. Her voice choked. She said, "Please, Ethan, don't leave like this." Her action made my heart feel like it exploded. I spun around sharply, looking at Karen with ice-cold eyes. My voice was harsh. "When Sophia falsely accused me, why were you silent? Why didn't you say a word when Dad sold the laptop?" Hearing that, Karen burst into tears. She grabbed my hands, crying and stammering. I was scared. I didn't know who to listen to. I didn't know which side to stand on. And I was wrong. Cold wind whipped across my face. I stood frozen like a statue at the crossroads of my life. On one side was the crying of my little sister. On the other was the choked voice of my stepmother. At that moment, I suddenly felt that family affection sometimes resembled a cruel joke. The betrayer begging for forgiveness, while the one who had been silent wanted to salvage things when it was too late. And then from Sophia's mouth came another confession. She said that for many days she had also begged Dad for forgiveness. But he coldly turned away, saying she had caused the entire family to fall apart. That trust, once lost, could never be regained. In that moment, I understood this attempt at redemption wasn't because of love, but just belated efforts. And for me, everything had truly ended. That night, after leaving with those questions hidden in my heart about the person I had always considered my mother, I no longer cared how Sophia had to pay for what she had caused. On her personal page, the clip that once had hundreds of thousands of views, the clip that dragged my life down to the bottom of society, had also been deleted. Her account disappeared in silence. Perhaps that was the sentence she had to face, not from me, but from her family and public opinion. From that day, when I chose silence to the point where everything had to burst into tears, was also the period when Sophia began living under confinement and coldness from the very people who had once spoiled her. As for me, in my silver backpack, the pages with my goals written down were still there. I had once outlined them with all the faith of an 18-year-old. I want to graduate from college with the highest possible achievements. I want to earn an internship at a tech company I admire. I want to buy myself a small apartment in Chicago to prove I can stand independently. I want to take Dad to see a Bulls basketball game to recall the days he taught me how to throw my first ball. And I want to save enough money to visit Aunt Susan, visit Mom's grave in the town where Grandma used to live, and place a bouquet of sunflowers there, the flowers Dad once said Mom loved most. In the last line, I had written a simple goal: make Dad proud of me. But perhaps that would forever remain an unfinished dream. After more than a month living at Jacob's small apartment, I still quietly went to my part-time job, trying to complete my final semester. My grades dropped compared to before as an inevitable consequence of losing all my data. But thanks to the $900 Dad had thrown on the floor that night, I gritted my teeth and bought another computer, enough to catch up on my studies and not fail. However, I remembered that silver MacBook every time I looked at the screen lighting up. I remembered Grandma Margaret, who had spent her entire life savings to buy me that gift. I remembered her trembling hands placing the machine in my hands and her words like a parting message. Thinking about that, my heart sank again, as if a heavy stone was pressing down. That day, Aunt Susan came to Jacob's house to pick me up after her flight from Minneapolis, as she had promised over the phone. My heart felt like it burst when I saw her walk in. She just gently hugged me, patted my back lightly like when I was little, and I hugged her tightly, whispering, "I'm afraid I would do something foolish if no one were by my side." But that afternoon, I had one more thing to do: return to the house I had left nearly 2 months ago to get more necessary documents. The houses in the suburbs were still the same as before, but the atmosphere was heavier than ever. When I exited the car with Aunt Susan, I saw light streaming from the living room. David stood silently in the golden glow, eyes dark-circled, looking at me like a stranger. Karen stood beside him, hands clasped together, trembling. Sophia sat hunched in a corner, eyes red and swollen, tears streaming, but didn't dare look directly at me. I walked in quickly, greeting no one and saying nothing. I went to my old room and removed my file folder and crucial documents. The room was empty and cold. The place that once held childhood memories now only had blank walls and a bare desk. When I walked down the stairs, Aunt Susan was waiting. Her eyes were determined, as if she wanted to say everything for me. David suddenly raised his hand, intending to stop me. But before he could take another step, Karen placed her hand on his arm, saying with a trembling voice, "David, don't try to keep him here. He's not safe here anymore." That truth suffocated the air. Sophia burst into tears, sobbing my name. But I didn't turn around. I just gripped the backpack straps on my shoulders tightly and walked straight to the door. The moment I left, once again, possibly the last time I would be in that house, I was no longer the son who had once yearned for family recognition. I was just a 19-year-old man carrying painful memories and choosing to walk toward the path I believed I had to take. After thanking Jacob and his family for their caring attention during the worst days of my life, I took a flight lasting more than an hour and a half to Minneapolis, where Aunt Susan had rented a small apartment near her house. I told her I wanted to live alone because I feared bothering her small family. I didn't want to make my life a burden for anyone else. From then on, I had a small, simple apartment that was enough to stand alone. Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert, her husband, still stopped by a few times each month to ask if I needed more help. Receiving that care, I could only bow my head in thanks, then promise to try even harder. When I had gradually stabilized, I found a new part-time job at an electronics store in the neighborhood. At the same time, I continued studying after being accepted to transfer to the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, computer science major, a new school, a different beginning, and a clear goal: build my own life with my hands. As for Grandma's MacBook, even though I had asked people to search online marketplaces, and even though Karen said Dad was also trying to trace it, that hope soon faded. Resold laptops are usually quickly dismantled into components and sold in scattered pieces. That meant even if we found some part of it, it would never be as complete as the gift she had given me. After that day, I blocked all calls from my parents. I knew that if I heard any more words, the wound would be cut deeper again. I only kept one email David had sent me with a brief line: "Dad just hopes you live well." I never replied, and perhaps that was also the last time we contacted each other. After many months of trying to heal my wounds, starting a new life with Aunt Susan's help, I thought the past would rest in peace. But no, it still found me in a way I never expected. A few days ago, while scrolling through TikTok, I accidentally saw a short clip. The account had no profile picture, just a few new posts and old, lonely videos. In the dark screen, a girl's trembling voice rang out. She confessed that she had fallen into depression after making up false accusations against her brother. The clip was over 2 minutes long, and the entire content revolved around my story. Even though I couldn't see her face clearly and wasn't sure if that was the person who had hurt me, every word that rang out made my heart go silent. Right before the video ended with a voice that had been distorted, the girl said, "If this continues for even one more day, maybe I will also disappear from this world under the pressure from family and the guilt that I myself have caused." After that video, there were many other negative posts on that personal page. Every time I read them, I felt chills down my spine, like an invisible hand gripped my heart tightly. I really didn't know what to do next. In the clip, the girl also said that if her brother forgives her and contacts her again, perhaps her spirit would be somewhat freed. Even so, she was still having to go to therapy after a long period of collapse. And I could only sit looking at the screen lighting up in the darkness of my room, my heart overflowing with contradiction. Forgive or turn my back forever. And my story ends here. Before closing, I still ask myself, was the girl in that clip really Sophia? If that was truly her, the little sister I once loved and also once hated, then what should I do next? If I were you in this situation, what would you do? Please advise me in the comments. I really want to listen. And if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video to meet again in the following stories. Thank you for taking the time to listen. See you again.